management. Now we're getting into the throwing process. We've already set ourselves up for success by weighing out our clay. Now what are we going to make with these projects or with these balls of clay? I recommend starting with cups. Cups are simple. You can do a lot of them all at once. They kind of free your mind of any expectation. They're a great way to practice glazes. They're a great way to practice texture or underglaze. Or
Can I pop in with a question?
Oh yeah, for
Sorry,
sure.
this is a more timely one, and don't forget to repeat it. Someone asked, why didn't you wedge the clay?
Good question. So I was going to show you wedging in the second part because we're using a larger amount of clay, and the reason why I didn't wedge it, you saw me kind of slap the clay around. That's my way of getting the clay to wake up, and I'm also cutting it straight from the bag. There shouldn't be any air bubbles or kind of irregularities in the clay, so that's why I didn't wedge it. Now, if you feel more comfortable and you want to wedge it, that's fine. It takes a little extra time. There's another step, but I think just pushing the clay around and jostling it around really gets that clay woken up so that I don't feel like I need to wedge the clay. Good question though. I wanted to make that a point, and I'm glad you asked it, because this first thing, I don't want to add too much today or for this first part. Wedging is a whole separate thing for the second part of the demo, because I want to talk about the 3 different styles of wedging that you can do: the spiral, the conch shell, the spiral, or the ram's head, and then the kind of cut and throw method that a lot of people do because they just can't wedge. Maybe physically they just can't manage it. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, and I'll show those processes. All right, well, let's get back on track about making mugs and cups. So why start with a mug? Number one, it's a pound of clay. I think it's a good beginning starting point for your clay journey. Either you just started learning on the wheel, a pound of clay is something easy to manage. I'm going to show you 2 different styles of cups, but I also want you to be thinking about this. For your own style, for your own pottery, I want you to be surrounding yourself and looking at good examples of clay. So good references. And where can you find those good references? I actually printed out a couple of sheets just from Pinterest. They have these great like diagrams of all these shapes of cups and mugs, and even Eastern and Western style cups and mugs, that you could look at one and say, hey, that's a great shape that I want to go for. I'm going to do that. So I'm going to start with the Eastern way of making a cup and talk about a Japanese tea bowl. So we're going to make a kind of a chawan that's almost squarish in proportions, and then we're going to do a unomi, which is taller than it is wider. But you can see here that there's lots of variations and options. But I want you to be looking at good references and good resources, because those are kind of tried and true shapes. Also, think about the purpose of your cup. Do you want it for a specific drink, like tea, or if you want it for coffee, or you want it for a mixed drink or a cocktail? Look at what history has shown, or what history has made that cup shape look like. There's a reason why it's that shape. And then, I like drinking old-fashioned, so I like a tall, straight-walled cup for that with a little bit of texture. So I've started making those in my own practice. But we're going to simplify it. We're going to just do a cup, a chawan style, and then a unomi, which is the taller one. And then we're going to move on to a mug body shape. And I've chosen, for mine, I've chosen to make a Pilsner cup like style. So Pilsner cup is taller and it kind of tapers up and out. what I've done is kind of shrunk mine down and made my body a little bit wider for my mug. So that's kind of the encouragement that I have for you is look at what like good references and you'll find some simple shapes to make. All right, let's start with a pound of clay. I gotta find my pounds in here. And again, I have them all ready to go. They're weighed out. They are, wedged. If you want to wedge extra, you can. You don't have to. And then the wheel process. The wheel process I teach to my students, like I said, thousands of students that I've taught this to. The first thing you want to do is stick the clay to the wheel. So maybe we can have like a little graphic that's like comes across the screen and says stick. That's the first step. And that's an important step if you're just learning because you don't want that clay to fly off the wheel. So what you do is you take your sponge, you wring it out, you place it in your right hand, and you turn the wheel on to about medium speed. And you place the sponge in the center of the wheel, and then you move toward 3 o'clock. So I'm going to refer to a lot of the wheel as a clock. So this is 12 o'clock, we have 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and then 9 o'clock. So the sponge is going to go in the center and move to 3 o'clock. And why am I having my students do that? Why am I having you do that? Because you start to realize that once you move the sponge to the right, unless you flip it because you're left-handed, you move the sponge to 3 o'clock, the wheel pulls your arm. And you want to train your arm to stay locked into your belly or into your body or resting on the tray because you don't want to be chasing the clay around. So you want to train your arm to like pull and tuck into your body. So that is one reason why I do that. The other reason why I do that is because now the wheel head is clean. It is slightly damp. You don't want like a bunch of water on here. And now I can slap this down in the center with my ball, slap it down in the center, and it's going to stick because we have a wet-ish surface. We don't want like standing water, we just want to clean the wheel head off. If you're working on a plastic surface, it tends to slide a lot easier. If you're working directly on the wheel head, a metal surface like grabs really nicely. If you're working on a masonite or a wood surface, that absorbs the water really quickly, so you could have some issues with it popping off. But those are things that you can fix along the way, and maybe you can ask those questions in the chat if you have any. But I slapped it down into the center. The ball of clay is cylindrical, so when I turn my wheel on, that ball of clay should not be moving around too much, and I'm ready to go. I remember first learning, never wedged. I cut a piece from the bag and I threw it on the wheel and I spun the wheel and it was just this big heaping mess. And then I tried to like muscle it in the center. It was so bad. I struggled for many weeks. I don't think I had an instructor that kind of taught me this, and so that's why I teach my high schoolers to do every little step, and I just give them a little bit each time. So if you're watching this in a playback mode, I would say learn the sticking and the centering and just pause and work on that for maybe a couple hours. Once you get it down, move on to the next step, and that way you can follow along. And there's a lot of information I'm going to give you in a shorter amount of time, but that pause button is going to be your friend, so go ahead and pause after you do the centering, and then maybe I'll remind you. All right, so the next thing I want to do is officially stick this to the wheel because this could pop off at any moment. So what I'm going to do is slap the clay down into this kind of Hershey kiss shape. And you do that by putting your thumbs together at this angle, and then you just hit it down. Some people do it with just one hand. You can turn the wheel head like this. You can use your fingers and just kind of push the clay like this if you don't feel comfortable, but I do this kind of all rhythmically. So turn the wheel, slap the clay, And then I'm gonna seal that clay so that it doesn't fall off or fly off the wheel. And this is really kind of a beginner's way of doing it. The way I do it now, I throw the ball of clay. I'll get to that, I guess, later. Let's just stick with the beginner. So now the clay is stuck. We have a stuck ball of clay. The next thing we want to do is center the clay. Centering happens in two stages. So the first stage, I want to center the outside of the clay, and then the next stage, I want to center the inside of the clay. So the outside of the clay is pretty easy to see, like, right? You can see the outside. If it's shifting around, you can tell it's off center. So how do you center the outside? You're gonna put your left palm at about 6 o'clock, and the palm part, the part of your palm that you're using the most is gonna be your pinky palm. I'll always refer to this part of your hand as the pinky palm, right? So that it's like the extension of your pinky. So it's the palm part where your pinky is, and that's going to be touching the clay a lot. And then your thumb, which is this part, and then kind of this meatier part, are going to be also touching the clay a lot. So grab some water, drip it onto your hand, let the water drip down onto the clay, and we're going to now lean into the clay. And I say put your chin over the center of the clay. Don't hunch over, keep your back straight, and then lean over the clay. And I'm using my pinky, and you can see where the clay is coming off right here, that the clay is mostly right here. That's what I was talking about, your thumb, the fatty part of your thumb, and then the pinky and your pinky palm are the parts of your left hand that are touching the clay the most when you're centering. So I'm putting my right hand on top and pushing down. And the clay is almost centered, right? There's a little bit of movement, but we're gonna get to that in the next section. So all this extra slip and clay, I don't use it to put onto the pot. I swipe it off and get it into my slop bucket. All right, now that we have a semi-outside centered ball of clay, we're gonna center the inside of the clay. Now, how do you get to the inside? You have to expose it, and you expose it by making it into a cone shape. So the taller a piece of clay is, the more surface area there is. So we're gonna make this taller by coning the clay. So now we're gonna apply the pressure more with our left palm and push towards the center until the clay starts to move. And then we're also gonna incorporate our right hand, and we're going to put our right thumb behind our left palm and pull with our right fingertips. So we're pushing and pulling, and we want to meet in the middle. We don't want to push too hard, and we don't want to pull too hard. We want to meet right in the middle so that the clay starts to cone up into a cone shape, upside down cone. So make sure you have enough water on your hands and you're applying the right amount of pressure. So I'm going to push with my left palm and then pull with my right fingertips, and look, the clay is responding and moving. I'm going to say this a lot during the workshop. Wait till the clay responds. If the clay isn't doing anything or doing what you want, you have to wait until the clay responds and adjust from there. So the clay started to move up. We're making progress here. So now I'm pushing and I'm pulling, and I'm going to move with the clay until I have now this cone shape. So I'm exposing more clay by turning this into a cone. And I'm going to now push the clay down so that it centers into a hockey puck shape. And I do that by pushing the point of the clay into my palm, my thumb palm, so the fatty part of my thumb. I'm placing it there. I'm not pushing straight down, right? Because that, you don't really have any control over the clay. What I'm doing is I'm pushing it off center. I don't know if the camera can capture that, but the clay is kind of bending forward. And then I'm going to lean into it with my right hand, and my whole body is leaning into the clay. And now I'm back in the centering position of the outside where all this part of my hand is touching the clay. All right, so let me do that in fast motion so I have enough water on my hands, and I'm going to push with my left palm, pull with my right fingertips, and waiting for the clay to respond. I'm also moving both my hands up with the clay as it moves up and pinching. And then the wheel speed. The wheel speed is about medium speed, so enough so that my whatever's on the wheel is kind of blurry when I look down at it. This is too slow, and then full blast is too fast. So get it to that medium speed. I start kind of at the fastest, which is my medium fast, and as I work through the wheel process, I actually slow down my wheel till it's almost like this when I'm shaping. So we'll get to that point too. All right, so I'm going to push down. Being patient with the clay and letting it move on its own, well, with my pressure. Okay, I'm going to pull it up. Don't get ahead of the clay either. And then push it down. So this part right here, when I'm centering the outside, I want to make sure that my hand's not shifting back and forth, and that if I put my finger right here, it's not bouncing and hitting my finger in just in an odd spot. All right, now I'm going to clean my hands. I'm not using the slip to help with the lubrication. I don't really use that technique. Some people teach that. I like to clean my hands as I go and just use fresh water. But if it feels comfortable and that's something you want to do, then that's fine. Just keep all the slip on your hands, and you can use that as a way to help you center. Maybe when I'm using more clay, I won't clean as much, but I think for a smaller amount, it's nice to just have clean hands. Okay, so now I have a centered piece of clay. I've stuck the clay to the wheel and I've centered it. Now I'm going to move on to the next step, which is enter. Entering. So I try and keep my left hand in the same position until I'm pulling the clay, which is a couple steps ahead. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring my thumb, my left thumb, into the center of that hockey puck or that ball of clay. And I'm going to take my right index finger and my middle finger and place it right on top. And then again, my left thumb is going behind my right thumb is going behind my left palm. And then I'm going to push down, and I'm leading with the thumb pad, not my thumb tip.
We have a question. Yep. You got a second? So someone asked, tips on avoiding craters when you're coning up. They freak me out, but maybe I shouldn't care all that much.
Oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So there's a crater at the top, like a volcano?
I think that's what they're saying.
Okay. So I think what's happening is, like, it looks something like that, where there's like a little crater here, and then you feel like you're going to trap air. That happens to me every once in a while. So what I'll do is when I push it down, I'll get rid of the crater at the top, and then I'll push down. How do you avoid it? I think what you need to do is really pull with your right hand against the clay, and you want to have this kind of be at a cone shape to begin with. So what I'm doing right now is pushing with my left palm right at this point, and it's creating a point. If you start with a crater, it's going to continue to crater. When we get to a larger amount of clay, I'll give you some more pointers on how to do that efficiently. And I'm really pulling from the bottom, pinching and pulling from the bottom up to the top. So the next one is I'm pushing down. And now I have a centered ball of clay, I'm going to wipe my hands off and we're going to move on to that entering position. Okay, so pause now if you need to practice this step. So the sticking and the centering. Pause the video and come back to the next step.
If you're watching the recording.
If you're watching the recording. So now we're gonna do the entering. So the entering happens with your left thumb over the center of the clay and your right fingertips on top and your left thumb behind. And we're going to just lean into the clay. Again, we're leading with the thumb pad, not your thumb tip. And you're opening up the clay into this crater shape. Now obviously you can't go all the way to the wheel head because you want a bottom on your cup. So what do? You have to stop the wheel and measure. At first, you really you should measure. After you do this a while, you probably get a sense of where your clay is. But I'm gonna stab the needle tool all the way to the wheel head, slide my right hand down to the top, or my right index finger all the way to the top of the clay, and I'm gonna pull this out. And the distance between the tip of the needle tool and the top of your finger, or the tip of your finger, is how thick the clay is. And I'm looking for a 1/2 inch. So I have a ruler handy, and I'm going to measure. So it's actually a little short of a 1/2 inch, so maybe 3/8, and that's perfectly fine. A 1/2 inch will give me a 1/4 inch to trim and leave a 1/4 inch. So if you're trimming, then you have some extra clay there. After you measure the depth, and you don't need to go any deeper, if it was thicker than a 1/2 inch, then you could go a little bit deeper into the clay and measure again. But once you're done with that, you're going to heal up that little pinhole that you created by putting your thumb in the center. And now we're going to move on to the next step, which is opening the clay. So we've entered, now we're gonna open the clay. We're creating a flat bottom cup. So the flat bottom is gonna happen in 2 parts. We're gonna pull our thumb tip now towards our belly at 6 o'clock, and then we're gonna use a rib tool to flatten the bottom. So we have a compressed flat bottom. So the first thing we want to do is pull our left thumb tip toward our belly, and again wait for the clay to respond. Make sure there's enough water on your hands. And I'm opening my clay up about 3 inches wide. So maybe it's about the length of your index finger, but I would have a ruler on hand just to start measuring things, so you kind of know how to repeat those and what your target is. But I would say about 3 inches wide is a good opening for a cup, and I actually do that almost for all my forms. When I do a lot larger forms, I'll open it up maybe 5 inches, but 3 inches is a good bottom. Then I'm gonna grab this kind of standard wood rib. I've also been using this pan scrapers by Lodge. They're really durable and they have great shapes on them. So if you're interested in purchasing something like that, these are cheap online and they're great pottery ribs. But I'm going to show you using this, and then I'm also going to show you using the Lodge because you might not have one of those. So what I'm going to do is use the flat, narrow side to compress the bottom. Right now I have a kind of an uneven bottom and I want to make it flat. So I'm going to hold my rib tool toward my chest, so the point is pointing towards my chest, as if I was a little, ant, and I was going to go on this really long slide down. So I want to angle it back away from me, and then I'm going to take this flat edge and place it to the right side of the clay, and then gently place it on the bottom. And apply pressure until the entire bottom is perfectly flat. You're probably gonna have some extra clay that came off, and that's when I swipe it off and I throw it into my slop bucket, because every step helps. If you have extra clay on your ribs and you go back to grab them, it's just gonna be a sloppy mess. So here's what that looks like with the the lodge rib. Very similar. I'm applying pressure. Notice I'm using two hands. I'm resting my forearms on the tray, and I'm holding this in place steady. And then again, clay is going to come off, so you just wipe it off. And then return your tool to your tool caddy. Okay, so that is stick, center, enter, open. And then now we're going to pull the clay up and make a cylinder. All right, so how do we do that? We're going to take wet hands and we're going to place them like this, like a big V. And we're going to apply pressure with our pinkies and our pinky palms. And then we're going to apply pressure so that now this wide open opening of the clay is going to go inward into a volcano shape. So let me just show you what that looks like. So we're going to push and apply pressure like that. So you can see where the clay pressure was, right here in my palms, and the shape is a volcano. Now I have an opening. I have these angled walls that will set myself up for throwing or pulling, which is the next step. And if the top gets a little uneven and wobbly, what I'll do is just take my index finger and point it and push down, and then take my left thumb and index finger and hold it in place. So that kind of establishes the rim and makes the rim less uneven. All right, now I'm going to wet the clay. I'm going to take my left hand, which has always been living kind of on the left side. Now I'm going to put my index finger and my middle finger on the inside, and then my thumb on the outside. So this is the pinching and pulling. So I'm going to pinch the clay together and wait for the clay to respond, and then pull the clay upward into a kind of a volcano shape. So I don't want it to flare out because that would turn into a bowl. But if that does happen at first, it's okay. We can correct that as well. All right, so I'm going to pinch the clay first between my middle left hand finger and my right thumb. And notice my right hand, we have the same position when I entered and opened. We're just moving those hands together. And I do this on purpose because you don't want to be switching hand positions so much that you forget what to do. So I just say continue over to the side in the same hand position. All right, I'm pinching. You can see that the clay is moving, it's responding. I have this little bulge of clay that I'm going to pinch and pull up. And I'll explain in a second what's happening. When I get to that rim, I'm going to ease off the pressure and then pull my hands off. Anytime you're touching the clay, you want to approach the clay gently and put your hands on the clay and then apply the pressure. And then when you're done, don't just jolt off. You want to release slowly so that the clay stays centered. All right, so what was happening there? I created these little ceramic bisque pieces so I can show you what's happening on the inside of the clay. So what's happening on the inside is you're creating a little bulge of clay, and you're pinching that bulge of clay and you're pulling it upward. Now when it's a smaller amount of clay, you can just literally just pinch the clay together and pull up. You don't really have to think too much about it. But when you get to larger amounts of clay, you do have to think about where that clay is going and how to create this shape on a cylinder. So I will show you by putting my left hand on the inside. Is that a good angle there, Curt? All right, so my left hand on the inside is my middle finger here, let's just pretend like it's being pushed out, right? And then my thumb is underneath that little bulge. And then I'm pinching the clay together so my inside hand is higher than my outside finger. And I'm pinching this little bulge and I'm pulling that up. All right, so that might be a better demo when we get to more clay, but here's that in real time. So I'm gonna push my middle finger on the inside out, and then my left thumb is going to gather that clay and pull up. Make sure you have enough water on your hands. And I want to gather the clay. So if a little bit of clay comes off, it's okay, you just throw it in your slop bucket. I'm gathering the clay and I'm pinching. And so my thumb is on the outside, it's below my inside finger. And then I'm gonna pull that little bulge upward. And when I get to the rim, release the pressure, because we don't want paper thin rims. And then slowly take our hands off. All right. A good friend of mine, Adam Field, described what was actually happening in a very understandable way. So what's happening is I'm stretching the clay outward. So I'm pushing from the inside out, and I'm creating a stretch, right? The clay is growing. And now I'm translating that stretch here into height by pulling that up into up to the rim. So I have now wider clay that I'm going to turn into height. Now, what I can't do now is use my left hand to pinch anymore because the walls are too tall. So now I just take my right fingertips that were laying on my right or my left thumb, and then I have them as an extension of my thumb. And I'm pinching and I'm pulling up, waiting for the clay to respond to my touch. When I get to the rim, I release the pressure. All right, that is the basics of how you...
Someone just asked, is your left thumb touching the outside of the clay at this point?
My left thumb is resting, yes. It's resting on the clay.
Repeat that. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't know if they can hear me.
Yeah, so the question was, is my left thumb at this point, when I can't pinch the clay with just my left hand, because I can't get my hand all the way down there. So what I'm doing now is I'm pushing out with my inside finger, and then I'm using my right fingers underneath. Is my left thumb touching? Sometimes it's touching, maybe it's just slightly off. So I guess no, it's not touching. That's a good question.
But it's touching your other hand.
It is.
Yeah, I do that too. Support.
It is
both hands
supporting
together.
both hands, yes.
This camera angle is working a lot better, by the way.
Yeah, good.
If you want to look over at the screen, you can see what it is.
Oh yeah, that's killer. Curt is awesome. All right, so yeah, that is exactly what's happening. There is space in between my thumb and the clay. You could rest it, but it might just get in the way and cause a problem. All right, so that is the clay process or the wheel process. We cleaned the wheels, we stuck it, we centered, we entered, we opened, and that was pulling. All right, now shaping. Shaping is the fun part. Like I mentioned before, we're gonna do a couple simple forms, and I wasn't really thinking about shape when I was doing this demo. What I was trying to do is set you up so that you can make a tall cylinder. Now, what happens if the clay gets too wide at the top like this and you're a beginner and you're like, oh, I'm just pulling and pulling and pulling. So what's happening there is I am pulling harder or pushing harder with my inside hand than I am with my outside hand. What you want to do is make them even. So when you're pinching, that's why I call it a pinch and a pull. So you're pinching and you pinch evenly with your outside and your inside fingers. But sometimes we just start moving outward into a bowl shape. So how do you correct this? Go back to the centering position, which is with your left palm against the clay, and then your right fingertips on the other side of the clay. And you might have to kind of wrap your right hand around, right? And then gently bring the clay back. You don't want to do this too quickly because you'll get a fold in the clay. And then you'll bring that clay more narrow, so you're compressing the clay inward. I don't really recommend it at this point, but if it happens at this point, then that's one way you can bring the clay back. And with a bag full of fresh balls of clay to throw on the wheel, maybe you mess up and you just scrap it and then you move on to the next one. That's totally acceptable. I don't think that you need to struggle with one ball of clay for more than 10, 15 minutes if you're just learning. So some of these things can just be worked out through repetition. And if your clay is uneven at the top, one way to help even it out is you could cut it off, or you could use the clay that already exists. So I'm going to show you both. Needle tool, right? So you have a needle tool in your kit, I'm sure, and what you're going to do is use the needle tool to cut the uneven clay. So let's just say like I have this weird divot here and it's taller and it's a mess, and you're like, I don't want to mess with it, so I'm just going to cut it off. So place your needle tool in your hand like you are drawing, like writing with a pencil, if that's how you write with a pencil. And rest your hand, your forearm against the tray. And then you're just gonna make a mark about 1/4 of an inch down from the rim. And hopefully the kind of unevenness, actually the lowest part of the rim. So you're gonna place your needle tool there. Once you draw the line, I'm gonna now cut, and I'm placing my left hand on the inside. And once I feel the needle tool hit my inside finger, right, I'm just gonna lift that ring of clay up. And I teach that to beginners, but I really want you to learn how to correct an uneven rim without losing clay. I want you to start with a pound of clay and end with about a pound of clay. I don't want you to have a bunch of clay that you have to cut off. So here's a tip, how to make your uneven rim even. If your clay walls are tall enough to get your hand in it like this, and they're not touching the wheelhead, this is a good time to use this method. So this method comes with using a little bit of pressure, and you apply it in between your index finger and your middle finger of your left hand, and you're working on the right side of the clay. And what's happening is you're trying to get the lower parts even. So you're squishing the clay down, and then by squishing the clay down, it's going to grow wider. And then from there, you're going to squish the walls even. So you're pushing down with the webbing of your fingers, and then you're squeezing gently with the sides of your fingers so that it's applying 2 pressures at once. So I'm going to push down, and that's going to make my walls thicker. And now they're level, but now they're thick. So now I'm going to gently squeeze to make them even. So you saw that little divot, now it's gone. So let me show you that one more time. So I'm going to place my left hand there. I'm going to gently push down.
That's pretty.
Yeah. And then I'm going to hold my index. So if at any point the clay gets sticky, add some water. And now we have an even rim, and I didn't have to cut the clay. This is a lot easier when you have a lot more clay to manage, but if you have a really thin rim, you actually probably should just start over. But that's a practice that I'll show you in the second video as well, the second part. So I try not to lose my clay, I try and keep it. here's one part that I do actually trim off. Trim that little bottom bit right there, scrape it off, and now I have a tall cylinder. So we're ready to shape. So shaping it works in the pulling, and also in the kind of after you have a cylinder you could shape. So in the pulling, if I know I'm going to set myself up for a wider form, when I pull, I'm actually going to pull wider, so I don't have to do so much stretching later. But for this one, I was just showing you the process. So I'm gonna show you shaping really quick. So when I'm shaping, I'm pushing out from the inside, and then taking my rib tool and resting it on that little bulge, and then moving up to expand the clay and shape. There's lots of possibilities for shaping, but for now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this off the wheel. I'm gonna get another ball of clay. I'm gonna go through that same process a little bit quicker, and then I'm going to show you how to make a narrow foot and wide body cup. Hope you guys are ready for this. All right, any questions that we can go over really quick? So that's the beginning, that's the foundations of throwing, and I hope that you can rewatch that and I made it clear enough for you for your own throwing practice. So I'm gonna wet my bat so it slips in there nicely. I'm gonna wet my surface. I need to have clean, dry hands for my next ball of clay. I also have a towel next to me, or I just use my pants. I typically use my pants. You can get a ball of clay here. We're gonna throw it down and stick it to the wheel. We're gonna slap it. And then here's what I do in one motion. I seal it to the wheel with my pinky, and I center the outside all at once. So I'm gonna push with my left palm and pull with my right fingers to seal it and center the outside. Now I'm gonna center the inside of the clay by exposing it, by coning, and then pushing down. And then pulling up, coning. So I'd recommend coning 3 times, or until you feel the clay very smooth. There we go. On that third one, I felt the clay respond, and now it's really smooth. It's not lumpy. And when I finish, I want to make sure my left thumb is parallel to the top, and it's flat on the top, and it's straight on the sides. All right, now I'm going to wash my hands off really quick. Wash the wheel head off, and I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is enter. So I'm going to enter the clay. And if there's a little bit of stickiness, because the clay is sticky, add some water. I have a good sense of where I should end, but I'm going to double check by poking, sliding there, and then I have 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch. Yep. And I'm ready to go, so I'm going to heal up that little ball, or that little hole. And then now I'm going to open the clay. So I've entered, now I'm going to open by pulling my thumb tip toward my belly, and I'm opening only about 3 inches wide. And then I'm going to compress the bottom. And I'm working on the right side of the clay, and I'm keeping that tool parallel to the bottom of the clay there. And then I'm going to squeeze the clay inward, setting us up for the pull. So now we have that volcano shape. And I'm gonna pinch and pull. Actually, let's do that little thing at the top. So this is kind of straddling the clay with my index finger and my thumb, and then pointing with my right finger, and just making sure that that top is level. Alright, so now I'm going to switch my left hand to the right side of the clay, and I'm going to pinch between my index finger and my thumb. Let me clean this off so you can see. Are you at the, switch to the other side. Alright, so my thumb here and my middle finger are doing all the work, and my right hand is supporting, and I'm pinching. Uh-oh, some clay came off. Oh well, I'll just put it in the slop bucket. And then I'm going to add some more water because it got too dry. So now I'm going to pinch. This is right where my inside finger is, and I'm pinching and pulling the clay up. When I get to the rim, I release the pressure. Alright, I'm going to do this little straddling and pointing just to make sure that the walls at the top are straight. If the clay starts to get away from myself or get away from the cylinder, I'm going to bring that clay back in to make this shape here, this volcano shape, straight. And then I'm going to pinch and pull again. Notice before I had my forearm resting on the tray. Now I couldn't really get my hand in there, so I had to like turn my hand like this. So pointing my elbow up, pinching, and pulling up. You can see these little throw lines, right? They're evenly spaced. That means I'm moving at the same speed. And also the wheel is moving at a medium rotation. All right, now this is where I'm going to think about shaping. I'm going to start making this belly wider as I do my next pull. So I'm going to pinch. So I can't get my thumb down there, so I'm using my right index finger. And I'm pinching out. And I'm letting my inside finger be a little bit more aggressive, and then I'm pulling up once I get past the foot. So I have my foot here, and my belly and my walls are expanding beyond the foot. So that's one way to shape, is during your pull. So this shape is based off of a chawan or a T-bowl that is wide opening and with a narrow foot. So that narrow foot, it isn't any more narrow than when we started. What creates a narrow foot is trimming later and also making our belly wider. So the belly wider and the foot more narrow, that's going to be a kind of a traditional T-bowl chawan. So you can pick it up with two hands and cup it, or you can pick it up with one hand and really kind of rest your pinky underneath to hold on to it. This could also be the foundations to a nice single handle mug, because you can't really get more than one, maybe two fingers in there with the handle. But that's using 1 pound of clay. If we use more clay, we could probably make a taller cup.
All right, we got 2 questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you right or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
So I don't know if, because the video is mirrored, it's making it look different. I don't know. But, okay. And then the other question is, do you have a suggestion for a clay body? Does the amount of Brog/stoneware clay make clay more or less forgiving, easy to manipulate? I want to rephrase that before I answer.
Yeah, so let's talk about clay bodies later. Let's just get through this throwing and shaping process. But yeah, clay body, I use a soft bodied porcelain, so there's no grog in it at all. But if, whatever clay you prefer, you can develop that preference later. But I'm using a Nara porcelain clay, which is, it's a smooth clay body. I am right-handed. Is there a way to, is it really flipped? on Zoom? I
No,
know
if I was standing in front of you looking at you, it would look exactly like it looks.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that it's not opposite.
Here. Someone says in chat, show your right hand.
Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is start to refine this cup shape. I know I talked a lot about the wheel process, and that's something you can go back to and watch, but the cup shapes. Now, once you've got that wheel process down, the next step is to start developing your cup, your style. And like I keep mentioning, I just went with the standard teacup, and it has a narrow foot and a wide belly. And we're gonna also do a Unomi and then a mug body. So I created a narrow foot by just making the belly wider. And I'm gonna use my stiff rib first to define the shape, and then I'm gonna use my metal rib of death as a way to refine the surface and really give me some clean surface so that I can take it off the wheel, and also I don't have a bunch of wet, sloppy slip on there and it takes forever for the piece to dry. All right, so I have my stiff rib here, and I'm gonna angle this from the foot, and I'm applying pressure down into the rib like that. Whenever you can touch your tool that you're using with your inside hand, do that. Especially with cups, you definitely can get your hand on the inside. It helps you stabilize your left inside hand. So I'm pushing up against the rib, and I'm creating a 45-degree flow down to the foot. And then from that belly, I'm going to push out against the rib. Whoa. And now I'm creating a flat surface. All right, here is the personal choice. What you come up with is going to be unique and your own. So you're aiming for a basic or a traditional shape, right? But when you do it, something happens. It looks different. Maybe there's a little lip that sticks out. So like this belly sticks out farther than the lip, and you really like that. Maybe you want to, when you do this next part, which is the finishing rib, you use the rib as a way to create form. So I'm going to use this part of the rib, and I'm going to push this body inward. So now I have a little bit of a slight curve inward that's different than what I just had, which would be a flat surface. So if I wanted a flat surface and I wanted it straight up, I would use a rib that's flat and straight. And then that could be a look that you're going for. Now, also you have to think ahead. What are you going to do with your surface? Are you going to just glaze? Are you going to carve? Are you going to add texture? Are you going to stamp? Are you going to maybe alter the form right now? Those are things that you have to start developing and thinking about along the way. And I know there's lots of options. Choose one and move forward with it. You will get better at it, and then slow movements, slow adjustments will start to take shape, and you'll start finding your own voice and your own style. So for me, I like using the actual rib as a way to create form. So this metal rib has a nice kidney shape, and it has a nice curve. Some of them are different, they have different shapes, but I'm gonna use that rib, and I'm holding it almost like a 90 degrees away from the clay wall. So it's scraping. And so now I have a nice clean curve and a nice belly, or inward concave belly right here. I also have a wider skirt here, and then a narrow foot. I didn't make the foot any more narrow than I started. I will when I trim, but right now I didn't push the foot in any further. I just expanded the body to make the foot look smaller. All right, the last thing I'm gonna do is roll a sponge over the rim. Some people use chamois. I just use a sponge because I'm using a grogless or not a stoneware. I'm using a porcelain that is really smooth. So I don't really mind using the sponge. Sometimes if you use a sponge on the rim, it starts to take away the fine particles and the sand stays there, or the grog stays in there, and then you'll have a bunch of sand or groggy lip, which is not really nice to drink out of. So some people will use a chamois or a small strip of plastic, and they'll place it over the rim to push those groggy bits into the clay so it's nice and smooth. So you might want to think about that for your own clay body. For me, I just use a sponge and I roll my sponge over it. And I do want to talk about lips. A lip should be something that's elegant, something that's thinner, something that is that you want to put your lip up against. So when you finish your rim or your lip, make sure that it looks drinkable, and it's not this big chunky thing that's going to not feel nice on your lips. All right, so I'm going to pop this one out. I'm going to show you the silhouette that I have. I'm also thinking of thirds, so I have this bottom third and then this top 2/3, which creates a nice balance. That's something to think about. Also, my foot is probably going to be a third smaller than the top here, and that all comes with practice and looking at what forms you like to drink from or want to make. So those are things that come naturally for me because I've already worked them out, but you probably need to start thinking about them. You can use a ruler to measure how tall this is. This is 4 1/4, and then it's about 4 1/4 wide at the rim. So you could start doing measurements and writing them down and try and replicating those. That's one way to be consistent and also think about the form that you're making. All right, how's it going, Curt?
It's going great. This is awesome.
You're
a good ass of people.
How's it going out there? You're one of my only judges here, though.
No, I think this is great. This is definitely what I was looking for, having someone come in to teach throwing, because you're doing a exceptional job compared to what I would do.
Oh, thank you.
It's interesting to see someone who does this for a living. Can you move to the side camera when he's doing something a little more often? Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna do one more, and I'm gonna talk less, and we're gonna do a tall you know me. Do we have time for that? I guess we do, but.
So for this form, just for you, Kevin, yeah. I'm gonna basically leave it on this camera the whole time, so they can see the whole thing.
The whole process. Good.
This entire.
Okay, so we're gonna switch to the side camera, and I'm gonna go through the process without talking too much. So we have a wet and clean surface. We have a ball clay, and we're gonna plop it right down in the center. A couple taps to keep it in the center. I'm gonna wet my hands and place them on the clay. And then again, I'm going to use my pinky to seal it up as I'm pushing down. So we center the outside, where now we're going to center the inside.
Yeah, I love that idea. Take your hands off after every little stage. That's great. Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to pull up. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing with my left hand first. So I'm pushing against the clay, and then with my right hand, I'm pulling, and I'm moving my hands upward in that cone shape. Okay, my left hand is pushing down, and you can see that it kind of pushes it off center, right? And then I'm pushing that clay down. Make sure your elbows are anchored into your body. Your forearms are resting on the trays. Okay, I'm going to do that again. And the third time, just to make sure that it's really centered. All the clay is moving in the right direction there. Alright, so I'm going to take all this slip off, clean my hands and the wheel head so I'm ready for the next step. Alright, so I'm going to enter my left thumb and I'm pushing down. And I know that I'm about 3/8, maybe 1/2 inch thick bottom. And I'm going to now open the clay. You could actually use your right fingers and your thumb together. That might help out. And I'm only opening the bottom about 3 inches, maybe the length of your thumb or your index finger. And I'm going to press down to compress the bottom. And I'm scraping this extra clay off. Clean this up and show you. I'm going to take it off the wheel and show you what it looks like on the inside. Alright, next step is to push the clay together into this volcano shape. So I did that. And then make sure that the top rim is level. And I'm using my left hand to straddle the rim and I'm pushing slightly down with my right finger. So this motion. Again, clean as I go. Here's the tricky part. My left middle finger is pushing out and my my left thumb is pushing in. And if it gets a little sticky, just take your hand off, add some more water. So what the hand position looks like is that. So this is my inside finger and I'm pushing against my outside finger, like that. Keeping that same position. I don't want to rotate or move this like that, so keep it locked in. My right hand is supporting my left thumb and I'm pushing harder with my outside finger. Pushing up and in because I don't want to turn it into a bowl. Alright, so I want to try and make a tall cylinder. I'm pushing under, gathering the clay. When I get to that rim, I let go of the pressure. Okay, if the clay ever gets too wide, I'm going to bring that rim in. And then I can use that webbing thing to help balance the top. So I'm straddling with my fingers and pushing against my webbing right there. Alright, now I cannot reach my thumb down to the bottom, so I'm going to use my index or my middle finger and my index finger on my right hand to help pull, to pinch and pull. And when I get to the rim, release the pressure. So the goal here is that I'm making a tall cylinder with a pound of clay that's about 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little bit thicker. And at this point, I have about 4.5 inches by 3.5 inches wide. All right, I'm gonna make this cylinder straight by taking this extra clay that is at the bottom, that's kind of skirting out. Taking that off. Now I'm gonna put my left hand on the inside and push against the rib tool. And remember, if you can attach your left hand to your tool that you're using on the outside, always do that. You can kind of see where my inside finger is, that little bulge. I'm pushing my inside against the rib tool. So that scrapes all the extra clay off, it compresses the clay, and now I'm ready to shape. So I'm going to shape this by extending the belly here, and then pulling that extension up, straight up, so I have a Unomi shape, which is taller than it is wider. So there's the belly, and then I'm going to pull that straight up. And I didn't push this foot in to make it more narrow. I kept it the same dimensions that it was. The only thing I'm doing different is making this belly wider. Now I'm going to switch to my finishing rib, and I'm going to use this flat side first. Oh, yeah. This flat side, I'm going to switch it, sorry, back. I'm going to define this angle here. It's the same as what I did on the last one. So about 45 degrees. And then I'm going to go straight up and down with my finishing rib. And then using my left hand with my sponge, I'm getting all the extra water out from the inside. I don't think I explained that in the first part. That's how I get the water out. Take my sponge, hold it with my left fingers, and I push against the bottom as it's spinning. I pull up and clean off the rim. And there we go. We have a taller than wider shape, which will be my you-know-me shape. So I have these two forms here. There you go. So I have a shorter and I have a taller form. And these are just very traditional shapes that you can work with and start in your throwing practice. Again, this is a blank canvas. You could decorate, to the ends of the earth with these forms. I'm going to show you my mug body, which is now using 1.5 pounds. Maybe you guys have some questions at this point. I think I have explained it well enough. Same process.
Do you ever finish the inside of a cup the same way? Example with a rib.
Do I ever finish? Oh, okay. So I'm going to go over double ribbing in my next series, actually maybe in my third advance. So yeah, you could, to get rid of some of the throwing lines, you could use 2 ribs, one on the inside, one on the outside. And I know a lot of porcelain potters will do that to get rid of those ridges. I don't mind them in my throwing, so if you want, that's something that I'm going to teach in the advanced level, the double ribbing.
Second question, when you cut bottom.
When do I cut off?
Yeah.
So the question is, when do I cut them off? If I'm doing a whole production run, I will cut it off and then take the whole bat off. So I do it before I take the bat off. I'll cut the bottom off. For these, I'm doing it so quickly and doing it for the workshop that I'm not really cutting it. So I will cut it and then take the bat off. All right, so this is 1.5 pounds, and this form comes from a Pilsner cup. So Pilsner is tall, and it starts with a kind of a narrow foot, and then it kind of tapers up and out, and then comes slightly back in at the top. What I've done for my mug body is what I just made it more squatty, and so now I have a kind of a wider opening, but it's very similar to the Pilsner cup shape.
One more question.
Yes.
It says, in Southern California, our weather is super dry, as you know. How long do you let your pieces dry before trimming?
Yeah, so trimming is something I wanted to get to for today's session. I trim when things are leather hard. That means when you pick up the piece, it doesn't move, it doesn't flop around. And if you put your fingernail in it, it kind of holds, like you push in there, right? And it has a nice clean nail mark. What I'll typically do is put it under plastic for a day and then come back and check it. It depends on really the humidity of your studio but definitely put it under plastic. All right, so this is 1.5 pounds, and now I am going for my mug shape. So I got to do one more coning and pushing down. All right, so I'm going to enter the clay. So I'm going to wipe my hands off so that you guys have a good clean view of that. So I'm going to enter and open. Waiting for the clay to respond, so about 3 inches at the bottom. Flatten the bottom. Clean the tool and return it back to the caddy. All right, wet my hands again and push the clay into a volcano shape. All right, now my left hand is going to do the work again here by pinching and pulling. Medium speed on the wheel. So the bat almost came out of its little socket. That means I was pulling up too quickly and not waiting for the clay to respond. I can always tell when I'm in a hurry. I shouldn't be in a hurry. All right, the clay now is taller, but it got a little wide, so I'm going to bring this rim inward and then do a little compression with the rim using the webbing technique. All right, use my right fingers now. And I'm gathering the clay from down below, pulling that clay up. Remember to push harder with your outside hand so it doesn't flare out and turn into a bowl shape. I'm not cutting anything, just making sure everything's balanced. All right, I'm going to do one more pull. Pinch and pull. And I know my shape is going to be wider at the belly, so I'm going to expand my belly now. And if it starts to get too thin, you can like throw it back down like I just did, and then go back up. There we go. So that's similar to a Pilsner cup if I just refine that shape. But what I'm going to do is expand this belly a little bit more. So I'm going to scrape the bottom and push against the rib tool. And one trick that I learned about keeping, as I expand the form, if you put your hand on the inside, the left hand, you can actually expand the form by just spreading your hand out. Let me show you that a little bit lower. Sorry, expanding your hand out, and that's going to help keep all the walls balanced by pushing against my pinky and my index finger. All right, now I'm going to switch over to my finishing rib, and this little curve here is what I'm using to create that foot to belly transition. And then my inside finger is pushing against this part of the rib. Expanding. Clay out, waiting for the clay to respond. Now I'm going to throw back down. And I want this to be bellied out slightly more. So pushing outward. And that is my Pilsner mug. So I'm gonna get the water out from the inside, and then we're gonna transition into handles. I think that we're kind of running out of time for creating or you doing the whole trimming. What do you think, Curt? So we're at
6:45.
Yeah, so we have about 15 minutes. I want to do handles and I want to do trimming. Should we power through
one to transition to tomorrow, or?
I think we should keep it in the beginning stages, the trimming.
Okay. And handles for intermediate.
Handles can be intermediate.
I think that sounds great.
I think that's a good because this could be a tumbler, right? I mean, you don't need a handle. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about handles in the intermediate stage, and we're going to talk about trimming right now. Because I think trimming only takes about 15 minutes to discuss. I have, through the magic of television, all these forms that I've thrown, have them ready to go to trim. And I'm going to transition to a different bats than I've been using. So this bat now is going to move away.